It is 7 o'clock. Good to see you this morning. Children in England are heading back to school, and with their return come big questions to be answered. What effects will the mixing of students have on the nation's coronavirus figures? Will the government's catch-up programme actually get people's learning back on track after the severe disruption caused by the pandemic? The Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, joins us in the studio in just a few minutes' time. But also on the programme, we'll be discussing this, the perilous situation for female judges in Afghanistan. At 7:30, I'll be speaking to one woman who escaped the Taliban and one who's still fearing for her life inside the country. Also ahead, how lockdown got us up and moving. Some of us anyway. 8:15, legendary long-distance runner Paula Radcliffe will be joining us to discuss the evidence that the pandemic has increased activity levels. It's Thursday, the 2nd of September. Testing the recovery. Unions warn that COVID cases could rise as pupils return to school in England and Wales.
All my GCSE work so far has kind of had this disruption that it'd be nice to kind of just go through, at least a term or whatever without any kind of isolation.
The Foreign Secretary heads to Doha for talks with Qatari leaders on how to help British nationals still trying to leave Afghanistan. The Afghan refugee who made it to the very top of women's football but hasn't changed her opinion of the Taliban regime.
They're the wolves that are, disguise themselves in sheep right now, and then the true call is going to come true.
A state of emergency is declared in New York as flash floods and heavy rain hit the city. Dripping in gold, the swimmer-turned-cyclist Dame Sarah Storey becomes Great Britain's most successful Paralympian ever. But as for the weather, mild and cloudy for most, with the best of the sunshine in Scotland. Morning all. Pupils start to return to classrooms in England and Wales this morning in what could prove a big test for two key government policies. In England, pupils will now be able to mix with other year groups. Face coverings are optional, and contact of a positive case will no longer have to isolate automatically. These relaxed measures have led unions to warn that COVID-19 infections could rise. Meanwhile, the government is hoping that 6 million pupils will benefit from its catch-up support, designed to make up for the disruption caused by the pandemic. Laura Bundock has our first report.
They've brought them in early for lateral flows. But there's a much bigger test ahead. Can schools keep COVID under control? Students at the charter school in South London hope so.
All my GCSE work so far has kind of had this disruption that it'd be nice to kind of just go through, at least a term or whatever without any kind of isolation.
We've been in and out of lockdowns for the past 2 years, and obviously it's quite important since we're in year 11.
I'll be able to commute with the teachers more easily. They'll be able to get across to me more easily, face-to-face contact. I think that's better than online.
Walk through the corridors and all restrictions are now removed.
It's a really exciting moment. The students are coming back. It's going to be a normal opportunity for them. They're going to be able to go around the entire school.
Bubbles are gone, as are face masks and whole class isolations.
If everything goes right, then we will keep the school open, we will keep it running, and we will continue to have a good learning experience for our students. We did it last year. We had very few outbreaks and problems last year.
Here they hope routine testing will help and students will receive regular reminders.
When children are back in classrooms, it's widely expected cases will rise. How much and for how long isn't known. But one thing's certain, a balance this term will have to be struck for students between the risk of the virus and the risk of more disruption to learning.
Unions warn more must be done to keep kids in classrooms.
The measures we need in place to stop cases spreading so that children don't miss school are real improvements in ventilation, in air filtration, possibly in mask wearing. We'd like to see the Prime Minister putting out a call for secondary students to test themselves twice a week with the LFT tests.
You just need to do 5 circles in each nostril, OK?
It will be a testing new term. The challenge now, losing restrictions and keeping schools open. Laura Bundock, Sky News in South London.
And as mentioned, we are hoping to be speaking to the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, in just a few minutes' time for some face-to-face learning, so stay where you are for that. But still to come on the programme, aside from the Education Secretary, we'll be speaking to 5 minutes past 8, we'll be speaking to Preet Gill, Labour's Shadow International Development Secretary, to see what she thinks the Foreign Secretary can achieve in Qatar. At 20 past 8, I'll be speaking to the Chief Inspector of Ofsted about students returning to schools in England and Wales. And at 8:30, Sir Christopher Mayer will be here talking about global terror threats following the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan. But as we wait for the Education Secretary, let's take a look at a few of the day's other main stories now. And, well, first, let's start with the latest coronavirus data for the UK, shall we? There have been a further 35,693 new cases of coronavirus reported in the latest 24-hour period. A further 207 people died after contracting COVID. This number is likely to include some delayed reporting due to the bank holiday. It takes the total number of people who've died within 28 days of a positive test to 132,742. Breaking news this morning, a state of emergency has been declared in New York City and New Jersey. Dramatic pictures, but in a tweet, the mayor of the city, Bill de Blasio, warned people to stay inside to avoid the flash floods and heavy rain. He asked New Yorkers to stay off the streets and to let first responders and emergency services get their work done. Flooding has been recorded across the city, including these images of a subway station being overcome by water. And there's been further reports of flash flooding in Washington, D.C. and Pittsburgh, as well as the aftermath from tornadoes in New Jersey and Maryland. Very pleased to say that the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, is here with us in the studio. Very good, as I mentioned, good to have some face-to-face learning for once between the two of us.
I think we've all been craving it.
We have indeed.
You know, it's back to normality as much as possible.
Well, that is an appropriate place for where we should start then. And of course, you will want to talk, I'm sure, about the tutoring that you're announcing today. But in terms of people getting back to school today, how confident are we? We hit term running. It's starting as we mean to go on, that we will not see as we perhaps edge into the winter months some form of reversal?
Well, we're very confident, but, I mean, I think you'd probably want to join us today in sort of wishing all those children, maybe going to school for the first time, a little bit of excitement, a little bit of nervousness that they're feeling, those children going on to secondary school or just moving up a year, wishing them the very best. Yeah. And what we wanted to do is to get that school experience back to that sort of normal pre-pandemic sort of sense as before. And I think that's the right thing to do. You know, we've been over the summer, we've been enjoying life back as normal, going to pubs, going to sporting venues. It's really important that our children are getting that normal experience to boot.
So how are we going to ensure that that normal experience continues? Testing is clearly going to be a big part of that.
Yeah. Testing is a vital part of that, and that's why we're rolling out testing for all secondary school pupils. You're seeing, seeing over the next couple of weeks, you'll see somewhere in the region of 9 million tests plus done in terms of children, and we're wanting to capture the virus there. But of course, we do have a contingency framework in place if there's areas of particular need that we do have to take further action.
When you say contingency framework, what do you mean? Because people will hear that and they will assume back to bubbles, back to classes, perhaps whole year groups being told to go home.
Yeah. So that's what we are absolutely clear that we want to avoid. That's why we've made the changes that we have. We want children to be in the classroom. Yes, of course, if a child has COVID, they'll have to self-isolate. Test and trace will contact those who've been in contact with them, and they'll advise them to have a PCR test. But actually, those children will be able to continue to go to school, they'll be able to continue to be in the classroom unless they test positive.
But can we just be absolutely clear? There is an expectation, isn't there, that we are going to see COVID cases rise and rise significantly as a result of face-to-face learning again, just as we have seen in Scotland?
We are having to strike a sensible balance to making sure that children get the very best education.
But we are expecting COVID cases to rise. We must be.
But this is why, you know, we're doing the mass testing in schools, because we want to identify those cases. And as I say, you're going to see 9 million plus tests carried out over the next few weeks, really trying to spot those COVID cases before they go into school.
In terms of the children that are getting back to school today, children and young adults, of course, getting back into school today, it will be markedly different from the conditions that they left the other side of the term. End to bubbles, the end to the kind of the exclusion of whole years, face masks certainly not being mandated in schools. I mean, Jeff Barton from the Association of School and College Leaders suggested it feels a little like a case of hit and hope on the part of the government. Why did we not continue with some of those mitigations?
Well, we have continued with sort of key elements of mitigations, including the testing. But there's a big difference between schools returning this September compared to when schools returned last September and in March. And the key difference is that the British population, everyone who's every adult has been offered not just one jab, but two. And of course, vaccines are the thing that have been the game changer. That's the reason that we've been able to lift national restrictions. But for me, children getting a normal education experience as it was pre-pandemic is so vital, because we've got to put them first above all others.
Understand that, but in terms of the vaccination programme, the JCVI are dragging their heels on making an announcement about a potential booster programme. The JCVI similarly appear to be dragging their heels on telling us what the advice is for those under 16. Is it perhaps the moment for the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisations to get a bit of a wriggle on and come to a decision on some of these things?
Well, I think, speaking as a parent myself, I think parents would find this incredibly reassuring to know that they had a choice as to whether their child would be vaccinated or not. And
there is a big question, though, isn't there, currently, as to whether or not we allocate our vaccine resources directly to a booster programme, which we would need to get started on immediately, or we address it to younger children, to young adults, I should say.
Well, we've got the capacity to be able to deliver vaccinations for children as well as deliver a booster programme. So it's not an either-or. It's a situation about making sure that we combat this virus as best as possible. And we're ready. If we get the get-go from JCVI, we're ready to... the NHS, which has been so successful in rolling out this programme of vaccination, is ready to go into schools and deliver that vaccination programme for children.
Sorry to labour the point, but I would like to hear the words from you that you're expecting a rise, and potentially a significant rise in COVID infections because of children getting together again. The fact is, the data shows that as many as 1 in 7 children and young people who catch COVID could have the symptoms of long COVID for months after. This is a largely unvaccinated cadre. This is a largely unvaccinated class. So I think there is a responsibility on people who are telling children to get back into school to accept the fact that some of them will, as a result, develop long COVID.
So this is why we're doing the testing programme, and we're encouraging, you know, children to take part in it, parents and, of course, teachers and support staff themselves, because this is how we can catch COVID. And we've seen over 70 million tests delivered in terms of schools and colleges over the last few months. And actually, this is a way of rooting out COVID. And you did see it was successful in terms of identifying COVID cases. And we believe by...
Successful, some would say.
Well, but what we are trying to do is we're trying to strike that constant, sensible balance of actually giving children as normal experience in the classroom as possible, but also recognising we're still dealing with a global pandemic.
I suppose then people would question why more action has not been done in terms of ventilation in schools. We have known since midway last year, perhaps even earlier than that, you know, this was aerosol, this was airborne. And working in confined circumstances like this studio, in a classroom, you needed decent ventilation. The only action that has been taken so far is the announcement that CO2 detectors will be sent out. So we will be able to identify where ventilation is needed in schools but we're not providing the money to provide the ventilation.
So it's a whole package of measures that we've been doing, and depending on where we've been in the pandemic, sort of making the judgment as to what type of contingency and support measures are there. You're right to point out the fact that we're rolling out the CO2 monitors so they can identify different areas. There's a whole set of...
When will we get the money for ventilation, though? I mean, that's what the schools are calling out for now.
There's a whole set of measures that they can undertake in terms of actually sort of dealing with some of those challenges. But, of course, the biggest way that
aside from opening the windows?
The biggest thing that we can actually do in terms of actually helping schools get back to normal, of course, has been the vaccination programme. And the vaccination programme is there to give people the protection and the confidence to go back to their normal lives. And that's the success of it. That's why, unlike in March, where we had to have so many more restrictions, as children go back in September, they can have that normal school experience again that we want for all our children.
I don't want to stress anyone going back into school on day one about, the prospect of exams later on this year, but they do need to know how they will be judged, on which way their merits will be judged this year. When do you think we'll have a definitive answer as to what will happen exam time next year?
Well, I think that's a really important issue that you raised. That's why back in July, before schools broke up for the summer, we set out to schools and to all that were interested in it what that process of assessment would look like for this academic year that we're just entering. We wanted to give people the confidence of what they'd have. We obviously, understandably, have to do a public consultation. We've done that public consultation, and we look forward to very much confirming as to the proposals that we've been sort of putting forward, explaining to schools what that looks like.
This side of the next kind of, the next side of the fortnight's holiday?
Imminently. Very, very imminently. But we've given schools a real sense and real taste what it looks like, what it'll feel like, so they can have the confidence to plan.
I did want to ask you about this, and I don't want to rehash the arguments that were made around the time of the exam results coming out. But we know, of course, from the results that we got, 70% of grades in the independent sector were A or A star, 40% in the state sector were A or A star. A huge gap between those who can pay for their education and those who can't. You and I both went to comprehensive schools. You and I have both sat in rooms opposite people who spent an awful lot of money on their education, perhaps even around the cabinet table, and have thought, where did all that money go? You are the one person in this Conservative government who could say, this is absolutely disgraceful, that our kids are being failed, then if you have enough money, you can guarantee them a better quality of life. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
So the thing that drives me so much in terms of politics, the reason why I wanted to become an MP is because you want to make a difference. I think of so many of my friends who I went to school with, a very normal comprehensive school up in Scarborough, is actually making sure that they have the right opportunity. And you want to close those gaps. This pandemic, sadly, has exacerbated some of the differences in society, and we want to drive that change back.
So is the funding, though. I mean, the Institute for Fiscal Studies has said, despite the government allocating another £7 billion, average spending per pupil in 2022-23 will still be about 1% to 2% lower in real terms than 2009-10. I understand the past couple of years have had an effect, but we are still dramatically underfunding the state education system in this country, aren't we?
So what we've seen the last 2 years since the Prime Minister came in, he's been able to deliver record funding packages, not just last year, but also into this year. We're going into a comprehensive spending review. It wouldn't surprise you, as being Education Secretary, I'll probably be asking for more, is probably what people would always be expecting. But, what we're wanting to see is world-class schools. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether...
You take my point, where there is this disparity between the independent sector and the state sector at a time when schools are just not getting the amount of money that they need to get from the government. Some of the blame for that great disparity has to fall on you.
Yeah, so this is why we've been raising the funding that we have in terms of state schools over the last 2 years. It's a mission that the Prime Minister and I both share. We want to make that difference. We want to make the difference for all those people that, the types of people that you and I went to school with, because they were our friends. It's what we know. It's the difference we want to make. That is our mission. We've been delivering that extra funding. We want to continue to deliver that funding, and we want to make that difference.
Just briefly, I'm not going to ask you about your A-level results. You, as a minister, know what it's like to be under pressure from the papers, from the broadcasters, from your backbenches. I just wonder, on the basis of what you saw from Dominic Raab yesterday, do you think his position is safe now?
Absolutely. The Prime Minister has been clear. He has complete confidence in the work that the Foreign Secretary has been doing. You're seeing Dom going out to Doha in Qatar today in order to be able to make a difference in terms of leading negotiations, playing a global role to make sure that those people who are still in Afghanistan that need safe passage have that safe passage out of Afghanistan.
Mr Williamson, busy day for you, as indeed it is for plenty of kids up and down the country. We'll let you go. Thanks very much for joining us. We heard him mention there, the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, has flown to Qatar in an effort to negotiate the government's attempt to get more British nationals out from Afghanistan. Our correspondent, Sally Lockwood, joins us live from Doha. Sally, just bring us up to date with the latest. Do we know who he's meeting with, where he's meeting?
Yeah, that's right. Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, arrived in Doha last night. We understand he'll be meeting with Qatari government leaders, such as the Emir of Qatar, as well as the Deputy Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister. Absolutely no suggestion Dominic Raab will be meeting with members of the Taliban leadership, who, of course, have had their political office here for years now. But the UK is in talks with the Taliban already. Now, on the agenda, we understand to be priority number one, evacuating those remaining British nationals from Afghanistan, and also ensuring safe passage for any Afghan citizens who are still in the country who worked for the British military in the last 20 years. That's number one on the agenda, but they also will be discussing the security and humanitarian issues happening and unfolding in Afghanistan. The threat of ISIS-K, of course, how they deal with that in collaboration with the Taliban, but also the unfolding humanitarian issues, such as the fact that the majority of foreign aid has been frozen into Afghanistan. That remains the case. Afghanistan's economy is heavily reliant on it. Many people still can't access cash. 1 in 3 Afghans have no idea where their next meal is coming from. The Taliban, yes, is in control of the country now, wields the power, but we don't know who their government is yet, and we have no idea what their plan is for running the country. I can tell you that Qatari officials and Turkish officials flew into Kabul airport yesterday, technical teams, to look at getting the airport back up and running. We understand that they are working on the radar system. That's encouraging news. There's already a runway there. The infrastructure is there. If they get the radar system up and running, then we could see flights resuming into Kabul very soon. But there is a very sensitive issue of security. Who's going to run that at the airport? The Taliban want to. So far, the Turks and the Qataris have said no, that is not going to happen. Stalemate there, but certainly some progress that those technical teams are already in the country, and certainly progress that the Foreign Secretary is here now in the region attending talks as well.
Sally, many thanks indeed. It's always nice when we've got some good news to bring you in the morning, and this is the best. Dame Sarah Storey has become Britain's most successful Paralympian ever, winning her 17th gold medal on a very successful morning for GB's cyclists. NBC reporter Heather Cox is in Tokyo and has this roundup of all the action from day 10 of the Paralympics, and indeed what we still have to look forward to.
Some more historic moments happening here today in Tokyo. In the women's road race, Dame Sarah Storey won her 17th Paralympic gold medal, surpassing swimmer Mike Kenny's previous record of 16 for Great Britain. Storey's teammate Crystal Lane Wright finished with the silver, making it the third time the two have finished 1-2 in these games. And the headline at track and field is all about conditions. We've seen rain the past few days here in Tokyo, particularly heavy at Olympic Stadium, where athletes have been slipping on the slick track. The rain is back again today and is forecasted to continue into the night, where we'll see American Daniel Romanchuk, who narrowly captured gold in the 100-meter, go for a second gold in the 800, an event in which he holds the current world record. And tonight, it's the women's semifinals in wheelchair basketball as Germany faces off with the Netherlands, while China takes on Team USA, who are looking for their 5th Paralympic gold. The United States is led by team captain Natalie Schneider, the 38-year-old mother of 3, who hopes to set the tone for her young team.
Well, let's focus just a little bit more on the GB Paralympic team. Shingi Madarike is in the newsroom, and he'll be sharing my excitement this morning, not least because of all the pun opportunities that Sarah Story's name provides. What a fantastic story, for example.
Morning, Niall. A fantastic story indeed. Overnight, history was made as Sarah Story became the greatest British Paralympian of all time, winning her 17th gold medal in that C45 road race, passing the swimmer Mike Kenny's mark, which he set in 1988, all those years ago. It's her third gold of these games, and it wasn't easy, though. The conditions in the race were damp and rainy, probably closer to those she's seen in Manchester as opposed to those you normally get in a summer in Tokyo in the shadow of Mount Fuji. And with 2 laps to go, she trailed the race by 75 seconds before storming clear, winning 7 seconds clear of her teammate Crystal Lane Wright, who is also part of Paralympics GB. And her journey is not just one of success, but remarkable longevity. If you remember that she, taking it back to 1992 when she started her Paralympic journey, she was a 14-year-old swimmer. Now, as a 43-year-old, she's the most decorated Paralympian in the history of our country. So plenty to celebrate.
Liz. Shingi, thanks very much indeed. Time to see how the weather is looking as we nudge towards the weekend.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
And for the next wee while, it will be mainly dry with sunny spells developing more widely, but it will turn more unsettled from Sunday. Mostly mild and quite cloudy at the moment. Some hill fog and a few drizzly outbreaks in the east, but western parts are clearer and rather chilly. Some mist and fog patches in the countryside. The morning will see sunny spells developing widely away from the North Sea coasts after a mainly grey start, with Scotland once again having the best of the sunshine. Fairly cool overall, especially near the eastern coasts.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
They say that 2 is always better than 1, and that's definitely the case in Sri Lanka right now, as twin elephants have been born. Twin elephants for the first time in 80 years. Oh, that's quite sweet. The male calves were born to 25-year-old female Surangi and 17-year-old male Pandu, she's a bit of a cougar, at the Pinawala Elephant Orphanage in the Sri Lankan hills. And who can fail to be cheered up by that on a Thursday morning? Still to come after the break, we will be discussing the somewhat perilous situation for female judges in Afghanistan. We'll be speaking to one woman who escaped the Taliban, one who still fears for her life inside the country.
Extremely excited and actually can't quite believe that one of my images has been chosen. So I'm still very, feeling over the moon, and it's just very surreal for me. So I was really lucky to be in Tanzania in the Serengeti during July and August of last year. And this is a time when the wildebeest migration is at its peak. There are millions of antelope species migrating through the landscape. And we just happened to see this lioness as she pounced upon a wildebeest. And we drove over, re-angled the vehicle, and this female was enjoying a morning feast. And unfortunately, the poor wildebeest was still alive. And as we drove the vehicle closer, she looked up at us and just gave us this intense, challenging stare. She was almost warning us away from her kill. And she just happened to look straight down my camera lens. And you can see her face is just covered in this bright red oxygenated blood. I mean, her kill was as fresh as can be. First and foremost, I'm actually a conservation biologist. And I started taking photos on the side alongside my research. And definitely the more you're out there, the more opportunities you have to see these incredible behaviours that you might not necessarily see if you're only there for a week or two. So absolutely, it's a combination of luck, but also just developing your skill and your eye as a photographer. I feel like I've definitely come a long way in the time that I've been using my camera. But yeah, luck plays a critical role, I think. The best thing about photography is it really is a universal language. You don't have to speak English to understand what's going on in a photo. I think it's just one of the best ways to try and talk about the issues that are going on in the natural world right now.
It's estimated that around 70% of our coastlines are experiencing increased erosion. We start with a steel structure that we put into the seafloor. We then pass a very small electrical current between what we call an anode and the cathode, and the structure itself is the cathode.
Welcome back. Hundreds of thousands of pupils are returning to their classrooms this week, with experts predicting a surge in COVID-19 cases linked to schools reopening. A short while ago, I spoke to the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, and pressed him on whether the government expects cases to rise over the coming weeks.
We are having to strike a sensible balance to making sure that children get the very best education.
But we are expecting COVID cases to rise. We must be.
But this is why, we're doing the mass testing in schools, because we want to identify those cases. And as I say, you're going to see 9 million plus tests carried out over the next few weeks, really trying to spot those COVID cases before they go into school.
In terms of the children that are getting back to school today, children and young adults, of course, getting back into school today, it will be markedly different from the conditions that they left the other side of the term. End to bubbles, the end to the kind of the exclusion of whole years, face masks certainly not being mandated in schools. I mean, Jeff Barton from the Association of School and College Leaders suggested it feels a little like a case of hit and hope on the part of the government. Why did we not continue with some of those mitigations?
Well, we have continued with sort of key elements of mitigations, including the testing. But there's a big difference between schools returning this September compared to when schools returned last September and in March. And the key difference is that for the British population, everyone who's every adult has been offered not just one jab, but two. And of course, vaccines are the thing that have been the game changer. That's the reason that we've been able to lift national restrictions. But for me, children getting a normal education experience as it was pre-pandemic is so vital, because we've got to put them first above all others.
Let's have a chat with our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen. Morning, TC. I've got to say, I'm vaguely surprised, actually, that despite the pressing, and we pressed for longer than just that clip from the interview, the Education Secretary would not concede that which everyone knows to be the case. That if you open up the schools and you have people mixing together indoors, then there will be a rise in COVID cases.
Yes, and that's what we've seen in Scotland, where the schools opened 2 or 3 weeks ago. In the past week, there's been an 80% rise in cases that Nicola Sturgeon has called extremely alarming. Everyone is expecting a similar thing to happen in schools in England and Wales. Now they're opening for many of them today or the beginning of next week. And the Education Secretary was open about the fact that things are, in many respects, back to pre-pandemic. There are no bubbles. In primary schools, there are no masks. The parents can gather outside. The big difference, he said, is that in secondary schools, there will be testing. Now, that testing is not mandatory. It is encouraged that all children and teachers do 2 lateral flow tests a week, and they hope that that will keep a lid on the number of COVID cases, because anyone who has any symptoms will be sent home, and anyone who's been in contact with them will be tested more regularly. But still, there is no recognition from government that there may be a very steep rise in cases. And although the Education Department say they are doing contingency plans for what might happen if there are very high numbers of cases in a certain area, he gave very little away about what new measures might be brought in.
Tamara, for now, thanks very much indeed. This is a fascinating story. One of the world's leading female footballers who fled from her home in Afghanistan has told Sky News that she doesn't believe that the Taliban have changed. Nadia Nadim grew up in a refugee camp after her father was executed by the Taliban when she was just 11 years old. Since then, she's played for top clubs in both Europe and the United States. Sky's Sadia Chowdhury was able to speak to her.
She defied the odds to become a star in global football. But Nadia Nadim hoped she'd be the only one that would have to do that. The Afghanistan she'd left behind was changing. Her father's killers had been ousted, and girls could try and mimic her moves on the football pitch. But last month, all that changed.
It's been heartbreaking to watch what's happening in Afghanistan right now, just because I felt we were over that stage. It was like back in the history, and it would not repeat itself. And I know what that means for the future of the country, what it means for the development of the country, what it means for the women and the girls.
After her father's death, Nadia and her family fled first to Pakistan and then to Europe. She made Denmark's national team, and last season, as Liga champion with Paris Saint-Germain, she perhaps gave thousands of young Afghan girls the belief they too could rise to the top.
How do you feel about young girls who would have watched you playing football and have dreams of playing football of their own? What would you say to them now?
That's a hard one. I don't know what to say to them, because I know they're not going to have the opportunity to do so. But I want to say that people should try to keep their hopes up, even though that it really, really looks like a dark situation.
Many people are saying the Taliban have changed. Do you believe they've changed?
No, I don't think so. I think they're the wolves that are, disguise themselves in sheep right now, and then the true call is going to come true. My dad was killed by the Taliban, so I know what they stand for and what their values are.
Today, the country is once again controlled by the group that killed her father, a devastating reality for Nadia.
I think there's a lot of similarities. I think right now, because it's a transition, so they're kind of still feel like low-key holding them back. But if you see what's happening in the airports and people trying to hang on planes and falling out of skies, no one would react that way if you were not scared.
Nadia still remembers the fear that drove her from her childhood home. Chaos and horror just like today, she says, and the feeling of being powerless. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News.
A remarkable woman. Elsewhere, Cristiano Ronaldo has broken the men's international goal-scoring record after converting 2 late headers. Portugal coming from a goal down to beat the Republic of Ireland 2-1 in their World Cup qualifier. Those goals taking his tally to 111 international goals, smashing Iran's Ali Daei's record of 109. The end of furlough and cuts in universal credit could cause a significant rise in homelessness, according to campaigners. The housing organisation Crisis says that a lack of access to broadband will exclude many people from being able to get support. Complaints about noisy neighbours rose by more than a quarter during lockdown. Research out today suggests that more than 1,000 calls were received every day by councils across the UK last year. Dudley in West Midlands saw the highest number of complaints. Sky News has heard allegations that Jehovah's Witness elders have failed to act over child sexual abuse claims in their church. Speaking to alleged victims, the claims range from a failure to report cases to the police to the demand for high thresholds of proof from the victims. Our Home Affairs editor Jason Farrell reports now on the group that presents a gentle image on your doorstep, but now faces damaging claims.
These children, now grown up, are speaking out about an institution they believe to this day is failing to protect young people from predatory paedophiles and to learn from mistakes of the past. Emily, who doesn't want to be identified, was sexually abused from the age of 4 by a ministerial servant of the Jehovah's Witnesses in Loughborough. Aged 8, she reported it to church elders, those in charge of governing and disciplining the congregation.
I was very young and sort of said, I don't like the way he touches me.
What followed was a series of failings that allowed him to continue sexually abusing children for years to come, which victims say is a larger cultural problem within the organisation.
Speaking about Jehovah became a wonderful joy.
Jehovah's Witnesses have a gentle image of those spreading the faith, but there's a mistrust of non-believers, and it's one of the reasons why serious allegations such as child abuse often aren't taken to the police, but instead handled internally.
They had a similar kind of meeting with him about it all, and unbeknownst to me, he actually admitted it to them. And then after that, they continued to tell me that I'd misunderstood it. There was no kind of reprimand for him. I still had to interact with him. I actually got told off for not sitting on his knee.
The abuser, Peter Stewart, repented and said there were no other victims, when in fact there were at least 4 others, including 2 sisters, who were speaking out together for the first time.
Because they believed him, he was allowed to continue in the congregation, and my abuse and my sister's abuse was allowed to continue.
Amelia didn't report her abuse until after Peter Stewart had been jailed for abusing 2 other children. He admitted to it and asked for forgiveness in this letter to the girl's mother. When he came out of prison, she tried to stop him rejoining the congregation.
They decided that they didn't believe me because I didn't have a credible second witness, because they have obviously the 2-witness rule.
Within the Jehovah's Witness Church,
yes,
a second person has to have seen what happened.
They do, and it's not just the 2-witness rule. The second witness has to be a credible witness.
Rachel, the elder sister who was abused first, wishes she'd spoken out sooner.
I always thought that if I'd have said that first time, if I'd have spoken out that first time when he'd kissed me, it wouldn't have happened to her.
Amelia successfully sued the organisation for failing to protect her. There are 130,000 Jehovah's Witness members in England and Wales, with a large central campus in Essex. If elders receive a complaint about child abuse, they will contact the head office here in Chelmsford, and they will consult their legal department as well as this handbook, Shepherd the Flock of God. Only elders can open it, and they are all men with no external child protection training. So what does the book tell them? Well, it reinforces much of what we've already heard.
Eyewitnesses, there must be 2 or 3 eyewitnesses, not just people repeating hearsay. No action can be taken if there's only 1 witness.
Lacey Jones was abused from the age of 10 for over a decade by an elder in the West Midlands, Clifford Whiteley. She has waived her anonymity to explain what happened when she told elders at her Kingdom Hall in 2019 that she was going to the police.
The first thing they said was, it's your absolute right to go to the police. However, what they don't tell you is that they will not cooperate. Cliff had confessed to the elders and they refused to hand over that confession to the police.
Police eventually got a record of the confession via a warrant, and Whiteley was jailed for 9 years in 2020. In a statement, the organisation said, when elders learn that someone in the congregation is accused of child sexual abuse, they immediately take steps to ensure the matter is reported to the external secular authorities as may be required by law, or if it appears that a child may be in danger of abuse. Elders do not shield a perpetrator from the legal consequences of his sin, do not interfere with law enforcement, and leave criminal matters to the secular authorities. Any suggestion that Jehovah's Witnesses cover up child abuse or in any way discourage or frown upon reporting allegations to the secular authorities is absolutely false. The independent inquiry into child sexual abuse is due to report its findings into religious organisations, including Jehovah's Witnesses, later on. Whether senior members of the church will act on them is another matter. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
More from Jason on the website, of course. But after the break, we will be discussing the concerns of rising COVID cases as students head back to school.
they can't go back to Myanmar yet. If they do, they fear they'll be killed.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. If there is a bigger explosion, this area would be in the danger zone.
These traffic jams snake for hours up and down this hillside.
We know that 800,000 people have been displaced.
Hong Kong is not China! I think experiencing the 2 million person march in Hong Kong, that was a moment.
Police have been firing tear gas and rubber bullets.
You see fires all around us here.
Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Bangkok.
It was my vision to come and protect wildlife in future. Animals like lion can enter into bomas, they kill their livestock, and this leads to human-wildlife conflict.
Did you know that if we make small changes to our lives, we can reduce air pollution by loads? But how much? Exactly, loads.
High pressure stays with us until the weekend, so the weather stays really quite quiet. The best of the sunshine in the northwest, but through the course of the day we will find the cloud thinning and breaking to give some bright or sunny spells. Temperatures typically in the mid to late teens, but we could see a high of 24 degrees Celsius over parts of Scotland. That's 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the air remains fairly clear because we're in this northeasterly flow, but the wind's going round to the east, so we could just see 1 or 2 pockets of moderate air pollution, most likely in the south today.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Now, pupils start to return to classrooms in England and Wales this morning in what could prove to be a big test for the government's education policies. In England, pupils will now be able to mix with other year groups. Face coverings are optional, and contacts of a positive case will no longer have to isolate automatically. Joining us now on the programme, Dr Yvonne Doyle, Medical Director for Public Health England. Dr Doyle, great to see you this morning, and I think plenty to discuss about how COVID-19 may well affect our schools moving forward. But can we just start with a very, very general, very broad question? I mean, how important in your mind is it that our young people, very young all the way up to late teens, how important is it that they get back into schools and have a proper go at face-to-face learning this year?
Good morning, Neil. It's very important. Being in education face-to-face in person is good for children, young people. It's good for their education, but it's actually very good for their health as well. And if children, young people are unfortunate enough to pick up a COVID infection, it's generally very mild, and they may not even know they've got that. And we know from our regular surveys that schools are not the hubs of infection. They reflect what's going on in the local community. But we are cautious. We want young people to take 2 tests in person on site in the school in the first week, and then twice per week at home until at least the end of September, just to pick up those late summer viruses that they may have picked up elsewhere.
I take your point about what happens in schools reflects what happens in communities, but of course, you know, the schools have been closed for the summer holiday. We will have people mixing together indoors, often in not particularly well ventilated areas. I mean, we will see a rise in COVID as a result of this, won't we?
We're expecting to see more cases because we'll be testing for that precisely, Neil. So we are asking the students to take these tests and then to do this throughout September. And that is to protect them and those around them, but also to ensure that there's the minimal disruption to their education.
Just in terms, though, of long COVID, it was something we spoke about with the Education Secretary a little bit earlier on, and it's slightly outside of his brief, but it does have an effect on the children for whom he has responsibility. Perhaps as 1 in 7 young people now displaying signs of suffering from some form of long COVID months after their initial infection. I mean, I understand that mortality is not something that younger people need to worry about, but they can still suffer some pretty significant effects, though.
So this is long COVID is the subject of a lot of study, and we still don't fully understand that, and particularly how long is in younger people. So I think this is something that is under constant review, and actually long COVID isn't one particular disease. It's a series of syndromes, and it really does need to be better understood.
Can we talk though about something which we do know a reasonable amount, and that is the mental health of our young people and the negative impact that being away, not just from education, but from their friends, has in social circumstances has had. I mean, just in terms of the return to school, in protecting our young people's mental health, it is of huge significance again, isn't it?
Very much so, and this is part of the healthiness of being at school. And we're very supportive of children being back at school. We would want the school, we always have, but particularly now, we're in a different year to last year. Many more people are vaccinated. 16 to 17-year-olds are offered vaccination, and I would encourage them to accept that. And of course, the 12 to 15-year-olds who are clinically vulnerable are also offered vaccination. So the school is the right place to be. We want young people now to catch up on their education. It's good for their mental health. It's good for their physical health, Neil, as well. And there are a number of measures in place in schools. It's a package of hygiene, of cleansing, good ventilation where they're in enclosed spaces. The testing is really important in September, and I'd stress that again. And of course, the vaccination offers. Now, if a young person has been in close contact with a case, they will be offered a PCR test as well, and they'll be provided with advice in order not to put clinically vulnerable people at risk. So there's a whole package in place here to try and keep our young people in education.
Just one question on variants away from schools, although it may well have an effect on schools. We're starting to see some concerns raised about the Colombian variant. I mean, how much do we know?
Well, this is under surveillance all the time. We have a very active genomics program in the UK. We're very connected to the WHO and internationally. So the UK is a net donor on genomics to the world, really, about surveillance. And we're watching this very carefully. Obviously, we will want to ensure that everyone plays their role in keeping transmission of the virus low, because if that doesn't happen, variants get a better chance of just developing. But the predominant variant at the moment is still the Delta variant, and we know a great deal about that.
We know that the vaccines work pretty well against it. Where are you, in your mind, about the strength of the arguments for vaccinating more than just the clinically vulnerable in the age group 12 to 15?
Well, this is a policy decision, first and foremost, but it's also a scientific discussion that's underway with the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. That's very topical at the moment. I think we need to leave it to them. They will consider very carefully the balance of risk and benefit. But more groups have been offered for the conversation we're having now. Young people, the 16 to 17-year-olds, are now offered vaccination. And extremely clinically vulnerable people will always be in sight for vaccination.
Dr. Yvonne Doyle from Public Health England. Great to see you this morning. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Neil.